He unknowingly came to the bar and found me drunk dancing with these strangers. Now I am divorced. Hey Reddit, this is my first time posting here, so I apologize if I do anything wrong. I've seen TikTok and YouTube videos and even Instagram posts about Reddit stories, so I decided to give it a try and see if I can get any valuable advice. Also, I'm writing this from my mobile, so I'm sorry if there are any formatting mistakes. My name is Lillian and I am a 28-year-old woman. My husband's name is Eric and he is also 28. Eric and I have been married for about 2 years now, but we've been together our whole lives. We grew up in the same neighborhood and were childhood best friends. We went to the same school and started dating in high school. That means, if you don't already understand what I'm trying to tell you, that we were each other's first in everything. Growing up together and experiencing all our firsts together was magical. From our first kiss to our first date and eventually our wedding, every milestone was shared. Eric has always been my rock, my best friend, and my confidant. Our families are close and everyone always said we were meant to be together. We did everything together and our bond felt unbreakable. I always thought that my husband and I marriage would last forever. I believed we would end our lives together since we were each other's firsts. We had shared everything together, our childhood, our teenage years, and now our adult lives. I thought we would be each other's last as well, that our love would endure through all the ups and downs. But I guess we would have if I hadn't destroyed everything. It was all my fault, and I know that. We both had good jobs. My husband was a doctor, and I had a regular office job. The pay was decent, but the best thing about it was the camaraderie I had with my colleagues. We were really close, almost like a second family. They were the ones who convinced me to go out that fateful night. Eric's job was very demanding. As a doctor, his hours were long and unpredictable. He was often called away on emergencies, and sometimes he had to travel for conferences and training. At first, I tried to be understanding and supportive. I knew how important his career was to him, and I admired his dedication to helping others. However, the loneliness started creeping in. I found myself alone more often than not, eating dinner by myself and going to bed without him. Our conversations became shorter and less frequent. I missed him terribly, but I didn't want to burden him with my feelings, knowing how stressed he already was. So I turned to my friends at work for comfort and companionship. With the free time I had on my hands, especially during the holidays or after work, I started hanging out with my friends more to curb the loneliness. It became my way of filling the void left by Eric's long hours at the hospital. My friends were supportive and always ready to distract me from my worries. We would go out for dinners, watch movies, and sometimes just spend hours talking about everything and nothing. As we spent more time together, my friends became more open about their own lives and experiences. They were mortified when they found out that Eric was my first and only. They couldn't believe that I had never been with anyone else. To them, it seemed like I was missing out on a crucial part of life. They started telling me that I hadn't experienced enough and that I was too sheltered. At first, I brushed off their comments. I loved Eric and I didn't see the need to be with anyone else. But their words began to chip away at my confidence. They made me feel like I was missing out on something important. They would share their own stories of wild nights and past relationships. They would paint a picture of a world I had never known. My friends didn't stop at just talking. They began to push me to step out of my comfort zone. They wanted me to experience life as they did, free and unencumbered. They suggested that I start doing things I had never done before, from going to bars and clubs to flirting with strangers. They insisted that it was all in good fun and that it would help me feel more alive. One of my friends, Jessica, was particularly insistent. She had been through a few relationships herself and believed that everyone needed to explore before settling down. She would often say, "Lillian, you need to live a little. You can't just spend your whole life with one person and never know what else is out there." Her words were always in my mind, even long after our conversations ended. I resisted at first, but the more time I spent with them, the more their influence grew. They were my closest friends, and I valued their opinions. Slowly, I began to give in to their suggestions. It started with small things. Staying out a little later than usual, having an extra drink, and dancing more freely. It felt exhilarating to break out of my usual routine and do something different. Jessica and the others were thrilled to see me loosen up. They encouraged me to keep going, to push the boundaries even further. They assured me that it was all harmless fun and that I deserved to enjoy myself. Looking back, I can see how naive I was. I wanted to fit in, to be part of their world, and I didn't realize how dangerous their advice was for my marriage. The more time I spent with my friends, the more I listened to them and loosened up, wanting to fit in. My husband Eric and I had been married for 2 years, but lately I felt like he wasn't even noticing me. Eric was always busy with his demanding job as a doctor, often working late nights and weekends. Our conversations became less frequent and more superficial, and I started feeling unseen and unappreciated. In the company of my friends, however, I felt seen and valued. With my friends, I found a sense of camaraderie and validation that I was missing in my marriage. They were lively, adventurous, and always up for something new. I started to listen to their advice and go along with their suggestions, hoping to bridge the gap in my own life. But looking back, I realize now that I made a lot of poor choices. One of the most regrettable things I did was almost cheating on Eric a few times. During that period, a new guy started working at my office. His name was David, and he was undeniably attractive. From the moment he joined, it was clear that he had an interest in me. He would bring me coffee, go out of his way to talk to me, and shower me with compliments. David made me feel special in a way that I hadn't felt in a long time. My friends at work noticed David's interest immediately. They were excited for me, saying that this was a perfect opportunity to broaden my experience. They insisted that it was harmless fun and that I deserved to enjoy myself. At first, I refused. I loved Eric, and I knew deep down that cheating was wrong. But the more my friends talked about it, and the more David was nice to me and showed interest, the more I started to think about it. David's attention was intoxicating. He made me feel desirable and wanted, something I craved desperately. I started to flirt back because I enjoyed the attention. We exchanged numbers and began chatting outside of work. Our conversations were light and playful at first, but they quickly turned more intimate and flirtatious. I found myself looking forward to his messages, and I would catch myself smiling at my phone, just lost in our exchanges. There was one night when things almost went too far. David had invited me out for drinks after work. I hesitated, but eventually agreed. I convinced myself that it was just a friendly outing. We met at a bar downtown, and as the night wore on, the drinks kept coming. The alcohol loosened me a lot, and before I knew it, we were dancing closely. His hands were even lingering a bit too long on my waist. David leaned in, and I think he was about to kiss me. My heart raced, and for a split second, I considered giving in to the temptation. But then, something inside me snapped. I thought of Eric, of our years together, and of the vows we had made. I couldn't do it. I couldn't betray him like that. I pulled away from David, mumbled an excuse about needing to leave. He looked disappointed, but didn't push further. I left the bar in a hurry. I knew I had crossed a line, even if I hadn't physically cheated. The guilt was overwhelming, and I realized that I had been playing a dangerous game. That night was a wake-up call for me. I distanced myself from David, cutting off our flirtatious chats and avoiding him at work. But the damage was already done. The guilt and shame I felt were immense, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had betrayed Eric, even if it was only emotionally. The incident with David was just one of many reckless decisions I made during that time. I started going out more, drinking excessively, and pushing boundaries I never thought I would. My friends encouraged this behavior, insisting that I needed to live a little and experience life outside of my marriage. I wanted to fit in, to feel seen and valued, and in doing so, I lost sight of what truly mattered. What's crazier is that during all this time, Eric just thought I was harmlessly hanging out with my friends. He had no idea about the crazy things I was actually doing. I would tell him about my plans to go out with my friends and even where we were going. We shared our locations with each other, so he always knew where I was. This transparency gave him a false sense of security, and he never questioned my outings. Whenever I mentioned our nights out, I kept it light and funny. I would tell him about the silly things we did, like trying out new bars or dancing until our feet hurt. But I never shared the details of the more reckless behavior, the heavy drinking, the flirtations, and the wild, impulsive decisions. I knew if I told him everything, he would be angry and probably wouldn't let me hang out with my friends anymore. So I kept those parts of my nights out hidden. In hindsight, I realized how unfair and deceitful this was. Eric trusted me completely, and I took advantage of that trust. He thought I was simply having innocent fun with my friends, not engaging in activities that would eventually jeopardize our marriage. He had no reason to doubt me, and I used that to my advantage, pushing the boundaries further and further. One particular night stands out in my memory. It was a Friday, and my friends and I decided to hit up a new club that had just opened in town. Eric had a long shift at the hospital, so he wouldn't be home until late. I told him about our plans, and he just smiled and told me to have fun. He trusted me implicitly, believing that I would be safe and responsible. That night, we drank more than usual. The music was loud, the lights were dazzling, and the atmosphere was electric. I was dancing with strangers, laughing and flirting without a care in the world. It felt exhilarating to let go and be someone different for a while. My friends cheered me on, encouraging my wild behavior. At one point, a guy approached me and struck up a conversation. He was charming and attentive, and I enjoyed the attention. We danced together, and things quickly became more flirtatious. My friends egged me on, telling me to live a little and enjoy the moment. Because I was excited, I found myself considering crossing a line I had never thought I would. But then a nagging feeling of guilt crept in. Despite the fun and thrill, a part of me knew this wasn't right. I excused myself and went to the bathroom to clear my head. I stood in front of the mirror. I stared at my reflection. I felt a wave of shame wash over me. I couldn't believe what I was about to do. I was on the verge of betraying the man who trusted me completely. I returned to the dance floor and told the guy I needed to leave. He looked disappointed but didn't argue. I grabbed my things and left the club, telling my friends I had to go home. They seemed puzzled but didn't question my sudden departure. When I walked home, I felt a mixture of relief and self-loathing. I had narrowly avoided making a huge mistake, but the fact that I had even considered it weighed heavily on me. When I got home, Eric was still at work. I sat in the living room, replaying the night's events in my mind. I felt sick with guilt, knowing that I had put our marriage at risk. I vowed to myself that I would never let things go that far again. But even though I avoided physical infidelity, the emotional damage was already done. I had flirted with disaster, and the cracks in our relationship were starting to show. In the days that followed, I tried to act normal around Eric. I didn't mention what had happened at the club, and he didn't suspect anything. But I knew our marriage was on shaky ground. I continued hanging out with my friends, though I tried to be more mindful of my actions. The night that changed everything started like any other. We had planned to go to a new bar that had just opened downtown. I was hesitant, but my friends convinced me that it would be a great way to unwind. Eric was on a weekend shift at the hospital, so I didn't have to worry about him coming home early. We arrived at the bar, and the atmosphere was electric. The music was loud, and the place was packed with people dancing and having a good time. My friends immediately got us drinks, and we started dancing. It felt amazing to let go of my worries and just enjoy the moment. I lost track of time and how much I was drinking. As the night wore on, I found myself dancing with strangers. It was thrilling and scary at the same time. I felt a rush of excitement that I hadn't felt in years. I danced with strangers erotically, laughing and flirting with them. Unbeknownst to me, Eric had finished his shift early and decided to surprise me by joining us at the bar. He knew where I was because of our shared location, and he thought it would be a nice gesture to spend some time together after my night out. When he walked in, he saw me in the middle of the dance floor, completely lost in the moment, surrounded by people he didn't recognize. The look on his face when our eyes met is something I will never forget. It was a mix of shock, hurt, and betrayal. He had trusted me, and in that instant he realized that trust had been broken. Eric demanded to know what had been going on, and I had no choice but to come clean. I told him about the nights out, the flirting, the reckless behavior. I admitted that I had been seeking attention and validation from others because I felt neglected and unseen. His response was a mixture of anger and sadness. He couldn't understand why I hadn't talked to him about how I was feeling instead of turning to others. We left the bar in silence, and when we got home, all hell broke loose. Eric confronted me again. He demanded to know what I was thinking. He felt betrayed, and I couldn't blame him. I tried to explain that it was just a harmless night out and that it didn't mean anything, but he couldn't get past what he saw. He said he couldn't trust me anymore and that our marriage was over. Eric also demanded to know what I was thinking, why I would behave his way. He couldn't understand why I would put myself in such situations. I tried to explain that I felt lonely, unseen, and unappreciated, but my words sounded hollow even to me. Eric couldn't get past what he had seen. He said he couldn't trust me anymore and that our marriage was over. Despite my pleas and apologies, he refused to forgive me. The next day, he kicked me out of the house and said he wanted a divorce, and my world came crashing down. I had destroyed the one thing that mattered most to me because I let the influence of others dictate my actions. I was devastated. My world crumbled around me as I realized the gravity of my actions. The influence of my friends, the loneliness, and my own poor decisions had led to this moment. I had destroyed my marriage, and there was no turning back. Eric filed for divorce, and despite my pleas and apologies, he refused to forgive me. My friends, the ones who encouraged me to live a little, are no longer around. They distanced themselves, perhaps out of guilt or because they didn't know how to handle the situation. I'm living with my parents, who are disappointed and angry. They remind me daily of what I lost and how foolish I was to throw it all away. I'm trying to find a way forward, but it's hard. I know I made a mistake, and I've learned a lot from this experience. But the pain of losing Eric and the life we built together is still fresh, and I'm struggling to move forward. I guess I'm sharing this here because I need advice. How do I move on from this? How do I rebuild my life after such a devastating loss? And how do I forgive myself for the mistake I made? Any advice or support would be greatly appreciated. I made a mistake, a big one, and now I'm paying the price. I also hope that sharing my story here will help someone else avoid the same pitfalls. Thank you for reading. Update. Hey Reddit. Wow, I did not expect the kind of engagement that I got on my last post. A lot of you had so many questions, and I'm sorry if my last post was a little too fast. I just wanted to get everything out of my system. Let me explain some of the questions I've frequently been getting. First of all, what about my friends? I think I mentioned this before, but they've all distanced themselves from me after this whole thing. In fact, when my husband confronted me in the club, none of them came towards us to even check on me or ask what was going on. They all pretended as if I had come to the bar alone and that they didn't know me, which is just crazy. So yeah, I have cut them off as they have cut me off. I had to take 2 days off work because of this whole thing, and when I resumed, they tried to engage me in conversations, but I ignored them. I've even turned in my 2 weeks' notice at work as I want nothing to do with those snakes. Since they distanced themselves from me, I'm distancing myself from them. I blocked them all. I don't even want any contact with them again. As for me staying with my parents, yes, that is true. After we got home and my husband confronted me, he thought about it, or at least that's what he told me, and then realized that he could not keep on living with me. He could not forgive me, and he could not forget what I had done. So the next day, he kicked me out. I had to go back to my parents, and that is where I have been for the past couple of weeks. Yes, my husband still wants a divorce. He is adamant about it and refuses to budge no matter what any of us say. I was not in the right frame of mind when I made that post, and I just needed somewhere to rant, complain, and unload my mind to see if I could get any advice on how to move on. I've been dealing with a lot of mental health issues. I want to see a therapist, but I don't see it as a priority. Not as my life is a huge shit show now. Maybe when things have calmed down a bit. If you're feeling neglected or unseen in your relationship, talk to your partner. Don't seek validation elsewhere, and don't let others push you into making decisions you'll regret. Trust and communication are crucial in any relationship, and once they're broken, it's incredibly hard to repair. Thank you for reading and for the advice. Despite the negativity, some of you have offered valuable insights, and I appreciate it. Update. Hey, Reddit. It's me again. I didn't think I would post another update because, like I said, I wasn't really in the right frame of mind when I made that first post. I wanted it to just be a one-time thing. I didn't want to constantly update, but I was getting a lot of messages and requests, so I decided it wouldn't hurt to fill you guys in on how things later went. It's been months, and I logged out of Reddit only to log back in again and see tons of messages asking for an update on how things went. So I decided it wouldn't hurt to update you guys one last time. First of all, my husband and I have gotten a divorce. I'm pretty sure you all saw that coming, and I did too, even though I didn't want it. It had to happen. I didn't really get anything out of the divorce since I wasn't a stay-at-home wife. I had a job. I had insisted that my ex-husband and I keep our finances separate. Even when my husband bought our house, I didn't pitch in, so I had no claim on it, and my name was not on the deed. So all in all, I didn't really get much out of it. We didn't have any debt to split, thankfully. After that, my husband told me not to ever contact him again and that he didn't want to be friends with me, even though I told him I wanted us to remain friends. Regarding my job, I left. I just couldn't continue staying in that toxic environment with those horrible ex-friends of mine. The atmosphere at work had become unbearable. When my husband confronted me in the bar and everything came to light and my so-called friends acted like they didn't even know me, it made me realize how shallow those relationships were. I decided to take some time to focus on myself, which has been challenging in its own right. My parents have been supportive in some ways, but their disappointment is still clear. They still constantly remind me of the mistakes I made, which doesn't help my mental health. I know they mean well, but it's tough to hear those reminders every day. The job market has been tough. I've been applying for positions in my field, but it's been slow going. I've also been considering going back to school or getting some certifications to improve my prospects. In the meantime, I've been taking up odd jobs and freelance work to get by. One thing I've learned through all of this is the importance of self-awareness and self-care. I've started seeing a therapist despite my parents' disapproval. I realized that I needed professional help. Therapy has been a huge help in processing my feelings and understanding why I made the choices I did. My relationship with my ex-husband is non-existent. He's blocked me on all social media and refuses to have any contact with me. I've respected his wishes and haven't tried to reach out. It's hard, but I understand his need for distance. He deserves to move on without any interference from me. I've also learned the hard way that not all friendships are genuine. The friends who encouraged me to stray from my marriage are no longer in my life. I've blocked them and cut all ties. Looking back, I realize how toxic and detrimental those relationships were. They didn't have my best interests at heart, and I regret letting their influence guide my actions. Moving forward, I'm focusing on rebuilding my life. I've made a promise to myself to be more honest and communicative in any future relationships. I understand now how important it is to address feelings of neglect or unhappiness directly with my partner, rather than seeking validation elsewhere. Thank you to everyone who reached out with supportive messages and advice. Your kindness has been a beacon of hope during this difficult time. I'm taking things one day at a time and trying to be patient with myself as I navigate this new chapter of my life. That's all for now. I don't know if I'll post another update, but I wanted to share where I'm at and express my gratitude for the support. Take care, everyone.